Alright guys, let's take a look at questions number 2, A, B, and C. We're going to use the same 5 steps that we used in the first problem. Hey, if you got a second, why don't you write those 5 steps, these guys right here, those 5 steps. Why don't you take a few minutes and write those on your foldable if you haven't done so yet. I think the back of your sine, cosine, tangent foldable will remain pretty empty. And so those might be a good 5 steps that you guys could put right there on the back of your foldable. Alright, let's go ahead and do number 2. Alright, just like before, I want to identify my angle. And this is the same question I did in the first problem. So I'm not going to do them again, but it would be good for you to take a look at it, do question A by yourself, and then check your answer off as well. So I'm going to start with question B. Alright, in question B, once again I'm going to start with step number 1, which is to find my home base. He's the only angle that is mentioned, and so he becomes home base. Step number 2 is to label opposite. I live across the street. Hypotenuse is my longest side, or the one across from the 90-degree angle. And adjacent is the guy left over. Just like before, I'm going to use step number 3 to box in my 2 important sides. I know that this has the number 1 on it, so he's pretty important to me. I know that I want to find that side, and so that's important to me. And there's nothing on the hypotenuse except for the word hypotenuse, and so I don't really need them. Alright, step number 4, you should all be looking in your foldables right now. And in your foldables, based on what you boxed in here and here, you're going to take just a second and decide who goes with adjacent and opposite. So look through the sine, the cosine, and the tangent and decide which one goes with adjacent and opposite. Alright, you should have looked and found all the way at the bottom of your foldable that it's the tangent function. And so I'm going to set up my formula just like I did above. So the tangent of my angle is 28, equals opposite 1.0, or it's 1, divided by adjacent. And my adjacent is W. Alright, this time I'm going to have to do a little bit more math than I did before, but I'm going to use the same process of my formula and then cross multiplying. So I say, okay, there's really a 1 living underneath there. I'm going to bring my math over a little bit and then I'll erase it in a second. Alright, so what I have this time, remember, put the W in front of the tangent, so W times the tangent of 28 equals 1. I want W to be by itself, and so what I need to do then is I need to divide the tangent of 28 on over to the other side. So and it's one number, remember, the tangent of 28 is one number. So I'm going to take this guy, and I'm going to divide by the tangent of 28 on both sides. Those guys will cancel, and when I do the math on my calculator, I'm just going to type in 1 divided by the tangent of 28. So on my calculator, I'm typing in 1 divided by tangent of 28. So I hope you grabbed your calculators and that you do this too. And I got 1.88 is my final answer. So a little bit of extra math. It's the same as, I think some people think of it as like the round little buddy. Sometimes I multiply, sometimes I divide, but as long as I set up my problem right, I'm just going to use my basic algebra, the same skills I've had for a while, to go ahead and find my solution. So what I just found then is that when one side is 1, the other leg comes out to be 1.88. Alright, take a minute and try this one on your own, and then you're going to do question C together. Alright, question C. Once again, I'm going to find home base. He's the only angle I have marked on here, so the 33 is my home base. Label opposite. Hypotenuse is the longest side, or the guy across from the 90 degrees. And then adjacent is the guy left over. I'm going to box in the 2 sides that have my information. There's nothing on my opposite side, so I'm not going to use that one this time. This time I have information on W, I need to find it, and on my hypotenuse, which is 4.5. Alright, I'm going to go to my foldable, and I'm going to be looking for the formula that goes with hypotenuse and adjacent. So go go to your foldables and look for who goes with hypotenuse and adjacent, sine, cosine, or tangent. All right, as you looked, you should have found that it's the cosine function that goes with this. I'm going to set up my formula just like before. The cosine of my angle of 33 equals adjacent, so my W, over my hypotenuse, which is 4.5. Use the same math, cross multiply, put that 1 underneath there, multiply these two guys. Remember, put that 4.5 in front of the cosine of 33. So 4.5 times the cosine of 33 equals, there it is. I'm going to go to my calculator. I'm going to type in, and you should do the same thing. 4.5 times the cosine, 33, hit enter. And I am getting 3.77 equals W. All right, take a minute to practice those two problems, and then we will do the next step. All right, you may have been wondering why the right side of your foldable says inverse sine, inverse cosine, and inverse tangent, and it's got that little -1 next to it. Well, we use the inverse function to find the measures of angles, but we use the regular function to find the measures of sides. So, as I look at my tangent I know is opposite over adjacent. What happens when I have my inverse function here is that when I use my inverse function, I use the tan inverse of the opposite over adjacent will equal my angle measure. And so before, where I was looking for a side length, I can use my inverse tangent or my inverse sine or my inverse cosine to go ahead and find the angle measure. And so that's why we use the inverse functions to find the angle measures. I know it's a little bit more confusing to understand, but the math is actually quite a bit easier than the regular math. Okay? So the tangent will give you a side, whereas the inverse tangent will give you an angle. In order to get the inverse tangent, the button on your calculator, look for the tangent button on your calculator, and then right above the tangent button, you should see where it says tan -1. For me, I have to hit second tangent in order for the inverse tangent to show up on my calculator. I think it's the same for most of you. All right, so let's try using some inverses. So now I'm not on the left-hand side of my foldable. I'm going to move over to the right-hand side of my foldable because I'm going to be finding angle measures. And in the right-hand side of your foldable, it says to find an angle. Those are my 3 formulas. I'm going to do things the same as before. I'm going to use my same 5 steps. It's just that I have to read the problem to find my angle measure. So he says, right here, use the figure below. What is the measure of angle y to the nearest degree? And so basically what it's telling me is even though there's not an angle measure marked on my picture, remember, never the 90 degrees. It's telling me right here in my problem that my home base is going to be angle y. So I'm going to mark angle y as my home base. So again, it's the problem that tells you which angle to use. It will never, ever, ever be the 90-degree angle. All right, everything else is going to remain the same. And like I said, you'll see that this math is actually easier than the math we were doing. So I'm going to label opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent. I'm going to take a look, and I'm going to decide which 2 are useful. Well, the ones with numbers on them are awfully useful. And the hypotenuse has nothing on it, so I'm not going to use the hypotenuse. I'm going to go to my foldable, just like I have been. So you go to your foldable. This time, I want you to look in the right-hand column of your foldable, where it says to find an angle. You will be looking for the formula that goes with opposite and adjacent. All right, you should have found that this will be the inverse tangent function. Remember, you are in the right-hand column of your foldable now, because we're looking for angle measures. All right, my formula for the inverse tangent is the inverse tangent, so the tan to the -1 of The nice thing is that once I write this down, all I have to do is type it into my calculator. There's no cross multiplying, nothing weird I have to do, no dividing. So I'm putting my calculator in my hand right now, and I'm typing second tangent, so the inverse tangent, and then I'm going to type in, it gives me my parentheses, 100 divided by 41. I hit enter, and I get 67.7. And so I know just by typing it in, like I said, the math on this one's easier, because all I have to do is type in the inverse tangent of 100 divided by 41, and I get 67.7 degrees. And so by doing that, I found that the measure of angle Y is 67.7 degrees. Luckily, the math turns out to be a little easier on this one. If you're having trouble finding your inverse tangent button, check with your neighbor, maybe even Mrs. Cronk can show you where it is, but you should be able to find it. It's right above the tangent button. All right, I'm going to do these last two questions, and then I'm going to let you guys get to work on your worksheet that you have with Mrs. Cronk today. So please take a minute. If you want to go through them with me, go for it. If you feel like you know what you're doing, why don't you just quick do them, and then you can check your answers on the board. All right, this one's asking me for the measure of angle X, so I'm going to label him as home base. As always, I'm going to label opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent. By looking at my problem, I realize that there's a number there and a number there. Those are my two useful sides. I'm going to go to my foldable, and I'm going to say, okay, which one on the angle side, on the right side, has to do with opposite and hypotenuse, and I've decided that that's the inverse sine function. So the inverse sine of opposite over hypotenuse is the measure of my angle. All I have to do is go to my calculator, type in the inverse sine of 6 over 10. So second sine 6 divided by 10. I hit enter, and I get 36.9. All right, and here's the last one, question B. Again, I'm still looking for the measure of angle X, because that's what it told me right here in my problem. X is home base, opposite, hypotenuse, adjacent. Box are the two important ones. I'm going to go to my foldable, and I'm going to ask myself who goes with adjacent and hypotenuse, and you should find that it's the inverse cosine. The inverse cosine of adjacent over hypotenuse equals the measure of angle X. And then I just type it in. Second cosine 15 divided by 20. Hit enter, and I'm getting 41.4. All right, guys, at this point, you guys need to, if you don't have it already, get the worksheet from Mrs. Cronk. If you do have it, go ahead and get started on the worksheet. It's really important, once again, that you don't just write down the answers. You really need to take the time to go through these questions. If you don't get finished with everything, that's 100% okay. We will have some time next week to finish this. When you do the word problems, please don't just skip them because they're words. Take a minute, try and draw the picture. That's probably the hardest part. Then compare your picture to my picture before you do the math, because if your picture is wrong, then your math will be wrong. So take a minute, compare your picture to my picture, and then work through the math. There's a couple of challenging questions. I did my very best to give you really good explanations and the solutions on them, and so make sure you take your time as you work on that today. Have a great weekend, you guys. Work really hard, and please do your best for the rest of the hour. Bye.